Hi, good morning, and thank you for joining me today. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about schools that have biology labs and chemistry labs, and why some schools that we're working with are starting to build personal finance and business labs. So basically what I'm going to cover is background about who I am, what my company is. I'm going to talk about kind of the history of the lab concept, which goes back decades. I'm going to get into the current status of financial literacy education, which is nationwide trends in personal finance, economics, and business curriculum and resources. And I'm going to get into some trends and best practices. So what are these labs, what subjects are usually taught in here, and finally, what does it take to actually build a lab and what some of the approximate costs are. So to get started, my name is Kevin Smith. I am the Research and Operations Specialist at Stocktrack. My background is in economics. I have my master's degree in economics. I'm working in a second one right now in public administration. I've been working with high schools for about 5 years, building curriculum and developing this lab concept. The company I work for is called Stocktrack. Stocktrack has been around for about 30 years. They were started in 1990 as the first web-based stock market game. So you can see the properties that we have all along this page. Stocktrack at the top is our main university product. We also have howthemarketworks.com, wallstreetsurvivor.com. Those two are basically free sites that are used by high schools and personal development for people who want to learn about investing. National SMS is another high school site. Virtual Stock Exchange is our international stock game. SimVest is another one of our stock games that was being used for more of a Forex trading simulation. Stock Market Investing 101, which is our beginner's investing course, and Personal Finance Lab, which is the one that I'm talking about here today. So our family of sites was used by about 750,000 students last year. It's growing exponentially. We're expecting to hit 850,000 users in 2019, and we're hoping for 1 million students per year by 2021. Just last year, we had 19,600 contests created by 14,200 teachers. So we work with a lot of classes. That's kind of where we came with this concept, because we kind of have our finger on the pulse of what's going on at a nationwide scale. In total, we've worked with about 8 million students since 1990. So I like to start out with this quote. 60% of those in secondary school were neglected. The college preparatory curriculum was too remotely related to the lives they were living and were going to live. Students didn't plan to become skilled in a particular trade because the jobs open to them did not demand the kind of training schools could offer. So this was an educator that was talking about a divide in the schools between students who didn't necessarily want to go into college and students who didn't necessarily have a trade they wanted to participate in the CTE curriculums. Now, this is not a new problem. This actually came out in 1951. In the 1950s, there was a very serious change in how high schools are run in the United States. This isn't anything we've seen before, and it's not something we're ever going to see again. Basically, what happened was, in the late 40s, most people started going to high school. This is not something that we can really even consider now, because before that point, the only people who would go to high schools were people who really intended to go into college, or people who were going to high schools because they were participating in a trade program that required certain types of additional skills that were taught at the high schools at the time. In the late 40s and early 50s, that changed, where most students were going to high schools. This is a problem because it meant the high schools themselves kind of didn't know what they were supposed to be doing with these students. So the kind of curriculum that started to be developed was what's called the life adjustment curriculum. So the life adjustment curriculum was designed for that 60% of students who now were going to high school who were not before. And the concept behind this was how to live. The high schools needed to graduate students with the skills they need to be adults. Personal finance, budgeting, civics, how do they find a job, how to behave at work, that kind of thing. The concept was developed between 1947 and 1956. It was heavily promoted by parents that grew up during the Great Depression, because these parents, they just had their kids, and they didn't want the kids to have the same kind of life they did. They wanted them to have a more financially secure future, so they needed to know how to manage their personal finances. They needed to know how to get a job. And they just wanted them to have a better life. That's why they were putting their kids in high school instead of taking them out and making them go to work right away. So this was very popular by the parents. The schools were kind of, meandering towards developing curriculum along this line. There's resistance by some of the collegiate wings that wanted to keep everything, 100%, by the book, hard math. But this was kind of the trend that was coming on. This trend stopped extremely abruptly in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik. With the launch of Sputnik, there was immediate crisis. There was a vision that the United States was falling rapidly behind on the sciences. All the STEM fields, engineering, and basically, as a country, we decided there was a crisis that needed to be solved. This is when the vast majority of schools started to get their chemistry labs, their biology labs, their physics labs. Money poured in at the national level. Science labs and curriculum were launched in pretty much every school across the country. There was a huge emphasis on four main fields: biology, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. These were centrally developed by the National Science Foundation, who published curriculum for all four of these things. Now, this is pretty important. You'll notice that one of these is not like the other. And when we look at what the National Science Foundation did, there were a couple key differences that you'll see. In the hard sciences, they basically started to use this lab concept almost because their hand was forced. They wanted to start really pushing all the schools to start being able to graduate students who had a basic understanding of the sciences and can continue on to research it. That means that they didn't have teachers who were already in these high schools that were qualified to do so, so the National Science Foundation had to produce teacher-proof curriculum. To build a teacher-proof curriculum, it meant that a teacher who might not necessarily be an expert in sciences needed to be able to teach it effectively. They did this through experiential learning, so that's why the lab itself existed. The teacher could have the students go through basically a experiment that the National Science Foundation had developed and standardized that could be rolled out across the entire country. So the teachers were getting trained. They were also just having the students go through experiments in class, learning by doing. The National Science Foundation published a ton of newsreels and film strips, which were also used as kind of a padding. And during this time, they were pouring a ton of money into actually training these teachers to be able to take their spins on it. So, in the 1957, 1958, 1959, the schools were basically using these pre-canned lessons, standardized textbooks, the same kinds of experiments across the entire country. Once the teachers were really trained and knew what they were doing, then you kind of saw diversification across the textbooks, the ways the teacher was approaching the subject. But the concept of using the lab was a runaway success. The students who went through this first generation of high school labs are the ones that landed the Apollo mission on the moon. And if the end result of your program is kind of used as the yardstick on the entire measure of human achievement, you probably did a pretty good job. Now, you did not see this in new math. So new math as a concept is kind of regarded as a pretty big failure. The reason for this is because you did not have that ability to use labs. You couldn't get the experiential concept. You couldn't get that teacher-proof curriculum to get things started, and the experiential side that really kept the students engaged. So with new math, it was direct instruction only, and because the teachers didn't really know new math to begin with, they were not really qualified to teach it. So you had confused teachers teaching confused students, and the parents were really, really, really not happy with this. Because even the parents couldn't help their students when they came home from school. So basically it was resisted on all fronts, and it was kind of a huge failure. When you contrast that with the hard sciences with their labs, a parent might not know biology, they might not know chemistry, but when they go to their kid's school and they see the lab space, they know exactly what's going on there, and they get excited that this is the kind of thing that their kids are looking at that they didn't have the opportunity to do. So the building of labs just had huge parental support in addition to just general government initiative and happy teachers, because it kind of gave them a break from having to come up with a billion lesson plans constantly. There's another reason why the labs work that wasn't really understood at the time, and it's called the doorway effect. So you might not have heard the term the doorway effect, but you've definitely encountered it before. This is what happens when you walk into your kitchen and you have no idea why you came there. When you walk through a physical doorway from one space to another, it triggers certain psychological mechanisms and impacts the frame of mind that you have. Basically, walking through a doorway can put you back in the same state of mind that you were the last time you were in that room. And when you go from one classroom to another in a school, when they all look fairly the same, you don't get that doorway effect. A student walking from their English class to their history class is still going to have to take some time to switch gears to get into the new frame of mind for the new class. That doesn't happen with a lab. When a student walks into a lab, they don't have the desks anymore. They have in a chemistry lab, they'll have the black-topped lab tables. They'll probably still have desks in the room somewhere, but the room itself, the space, looks radically different. And this is the same kind of concept that we look at when we're talking about labs for business and personal finance. It's making that different kind of dedicated space triggers that psychological effect that has a multiplying effect when it comes to learning. So when we fast forward to today, our new Sputnik is basically terrible personal finances. U.S. gets failing grade in personal finance literacy. Everybody agrees this is a big problem. Even internationally, it's not like we can say that this is happening to everybody. We're nowhere near the top when it comes to how well we're preparing our students to manage their personal finances after school. When we look at what happened with the life adjustment education back in the 40s, that was parents who grew up during the Great Depression basically saying, I want my kids to be better prepared than I was. And we're getting that same reaction today. All the new parents just went through the economic crash of 2008. Their kids are getting into high school now. If their kids were born 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that's what's happening. So the parents are basically saying, I don't want my kids to be crushed with the same debt I had and I've been dealing with for the last 15 years. I want my kids to have a better chance to be successful. So when it comes to the teacher ability to address this, we have a similar problem to what we had before. We are seeing states kind of in a piecemeal fashion put more emphasis on the financial disciplines. But what we see is when a school teaches personal finance or a business class for the first time, they're not really given any extra resources to do these programs. So you don't have the money coming that you originally had with the labs and the National Science Foundation. We call this the coach problem. Because usually the first time a teacher is teaching personal finance at school, it's somebody who, when we see them coming onto our resources, they sign up with a username starting with coach. They were probably a PE teacher, or they basically spent a lot of time on the sports side, and then the school asked them to take on another class, and they figured personal finance is something that pretty much anybody could do. This doesn't really work particularly well. There are some outstanding teachers, but basically the teachers are putting in a position where they have to find a bunch of resources right away for a subject they never taught before. And just about every teacher can relate to how frustrating that is. And it's not the best for the teachers, it's not the best for the students, and we need to find a way to fix that. So basically why it's so hard, basically for the schools, everybody else, is you don't have the conditions we had when it came to the National Science Foundation publishing all this new stuff for biology and physics. At the national level, there is no consensus. For just the personal finance topics alone, there's 3 sets of national standards all fighting with each other. The oldest and best comes from the Jumpstart Coalition. They published their set of national personal finance standards. The NBEA publishes their own separate set of personal finance standards, which they recommend for personal finance classes taught in business by business teachers. And the National Council on Economic Education, about 10 years ago, released their own set of competing personal finance standards. I don't know why they don't get along with Jumpstart, but they're basically a watered-down version of the Jumpstart standards. For economics, the National Council on Economic Education has published their economic standards for decades. They're really good standards. They're better, I would say, than the ones they publish for personal finance, which is kind of why they are pretty much the national standard. But of course, the NBEA can't let that go, so there's also a competing set of economic standards for business classes that they have published. When we're talking about business classes specifically, the NBEA kind of is one of the biggest ones around. We particularly focus on their accounting, management, and marketing standards, but of course there's also another set of separate standards published by the Advanced CTE organization, plus dozens of other state standards. Every state that makes any of these subjects required or publishes standards to have their teachers do it, do not just take the national standards wholesale. They publish their own variations, which means that every state has to be teaching something a little bit different. It's hard to develop standardized resources for that because every teacher in every state is asked to do something a little bit differently. When we look at some of these states, we do a few different things. We basically look at, does the state have standards published? Do they do testing at all? And we look at how much time a student on average gets in a financial discipline, where it's a business class, a personal finance class, or an economics class before they graduate. And we base that off a study that was published by Champlain College. So when we look at some of the biggest states here, California, for example, they don't have any personal finance standards published. But there's a ton of school districts in California that do personal finance. Economics is a required class in California. So a lot of the schools in California that do cover any personal finance usually merge it with some kind of economics class, try to hit two birds with one stone and save some class time. Champlain College gave California an F. On average, most students were getting almost no exposure to financial concepts before they graduated high school. There are a lot of districts in California that are doing an exceptional job, but they're the exception rather than the rule. We move on to Texas. Texas, for personal finance, they actually have two sets of personal finance standards competing with each other, and they do standardized testing. The two sets is, one of them is in the social studies department that every student is required to take, but the other one is in the business standards. So if a student is in a CTE program and a business program, they're going to have a different personal finance class. This is very useful for us because we can see directly if a student is learning personal finance from a business teacher, they generally are outperforming on the standardized testing compared to learning personal finance from the social studies department. This kind of makes sense because a business teacher who knows accounting concepts, who is used to talking about monetary concepts in class, is probably going to be doing a little bit better job of explaining exactly the intricacies of how personal finance works and how it really impacts long term. They also do economics required classes and testing. Texas gets a school rank of a B. They do really well, but they have the same problem that a lot of schools in other states do, where a lot of the times the teachers will combine the personal finance and the economics class, so the total exposure the students get is less. Utah is kind of the gold standard when it comes to financial literacy. Personal finance is a required class and standardized testing. Students have to take a class called personal finance in order to graduate. They also have to take a second class called economics in order to graduate, and they have standardized testing for both. Their financial literacy school rank is A. Students on average in Utah get the most exposure to personal finance concepts across the country. And basically, it all comes down to how serious is the state about it. If the state just publishes personal finance standards and says, use these as you like, it's not that great of an outcome. If the state says you have to teach personal finance somehow, a lot of the times the districts will just be combining it with their economics class, or they'll combine it with their social studies class, and the total exposure students are getting is a lot lower. But when it's combined with things like a business class, when it's combined with a business curriculum, when it's a business teacher, then we're getting the best outcomes overall. The concepts tend to click a lot better. So what a lot of schools are realizing is that their school probably already has a chemistry lab or a biology lab or both. If they're a CTE, they have a really strong CTE program, they might have an auto shop or a culinary arts lab. And what they're doing is starting to build these personal finance and business labs. So the personal finance or business lab has a few main things. The biggest attention grabbers are things like these tickers and LCD screens that go up on the walls. So it turns kind of the old boring classroom that looks like every other room in the school with the bored students trying to learn how to balance a checkbook into a much more exciting workspace. And you can see here exactly how the schools are doing this. There's a few elements on this that you'll notice. First one, the room itself is made of glass. students can see it from the outside. They can see the tickers, they can see the LCD screens. It becomes a lot more exciting workspace. Schools that build these labs, even if it's elective classes that are taught in there, have a much higher enrollment in those classes besides just the student engagement. Students think it's a cool place to be, that's where they want to go. Second, you notice this second ticker is not inside the classroom. This ticker is for the administration. It's for the parents. It's the same reason when those first parents are walking through the first labs in the 50s and 60s. They saw exactly what the students were learning in those places. These tickers on the outside of the room are to just get that excitement up. So these parents know this school means business. This is a huge lab that had corporate sponsors and everything, and you can see here they have tickers on the outside, they have tickers on the inside, they have screens all over the place. They kind of went all out, and they had those glass walls too, kind of bringing it all together. Now, what is actually in a lab? So the classes that would be taught in one of these financial literacy labs kind of varies a lot by district. A lot of the CTE disciplines focusing on business are usually want to take part in the lab space, and the biggest labs that we work with are in CTE schools. But we also have a lot of subjects that are often in the math department that can be used in the lab. Business math classes, personal finance classes, that kind of thing. Personal finance kind of shifts between all of these different scenarios. Depending on the district, it might be social studies, with the personal finance class and the economics class might be in the social studies department instead of either of the other two. So when it comes to actually building a lab and allocating the space, this is one of the challenges that the school needs to face head on. What subjects can we put in here? Mixing departments isn't always easy for budgetary reasons, but mixing departments is these labs are almost inherently interdisciplinary, and so the more you can mix, the more students you can get in there, the better. The real essential lab components is the curriculum itself. It doesn't need to be completely canned like the original National Science Foundation stuff, but there should be some standardization. There should be the heavy usage of interactive experiential stuff, and the hardware is kind of the cherry on top. Now, not every school that has what they call a lab even has any hardware. They might just be really focusing on making it a place where those games, the experimentation, the playing around, and the curriculum learning all happen in the same place. So that brings us to me and back to what we're doing. So personalfinancelab.com, this is the resource we've been developing for the last 5 years. We combine our customizable stock market game, our customizable budgeting game, and our curriculum, which it can be twisted and turned for business classes, personal finance classes, economics classes, social studies, and math classes. So we work with all of these regularly. Depending on how a teacher does their stuff, our whole thing is to make it flexible and customizable to make it easy to use in a class, but standardized enough so a teacher doesn't need to have 2 years of training to understand what they're doing. So basically, on personalfinancelab.com, we have built-in lessons. We have integrated videos, articles, calculators. We have a wide variety of lessons. There's over 300 of them covering 6 subjects, and teachers can mix and match. So you can pick topics from different subjects. So a business teacher can grab stuff from our economics libraries. Our personal finance teachers can take things from accounting. And you can mix and match these to go along with what you're already teaching in class, so your existing course outlines. But you can also add in extra stuff for students to do either as homework or it's just kind of a fun to have. All the lessons that we have built in have assessments built automatically into it. So there's self-grading pop quizzes with saving the students' scores with real-time progress reports. And we have teacher reports built into it too. So at the end of all of these lessons, there's a short 3 to 5 question quiz. The students need to take the quiz for getting credit. The teacher says, can the students retake it for a higher score, or do I want to save it for a grade? We also have our budgeting game. So our budgeting game gives your students the role of a college student with a part-time job. The teacher sets the original bills that the students are going to have to go pay each month, but the student rolls a dice and they actually move through the month a few days at a time. And they need to start managing the real-life events they didn't see coming. So at the end of each dice roll, something happens, usually something bad, like a flat tire in their car, or they got a speeding ticket, or they ripped open their backpack and they need to buy a new one. Students decide how they are going to spend their weekends. So are they going to study for classes? Are they going to work more hours at their part-time job? Are they going to do chores around their house? Of course, students want to earn the most money first, but we penalize them for ignoring the other things they need to take care of. If they don't study regularly, they're going to start failing their exams in school. They're going to have to hire a private tutor. It's going to cost them a lot more than they earned trying to get a couple extra hours. If they don't take care of their chores regularly, their landlord is going to come by for an inspection, notice the place is filthy, and start giving them huge fines. Their objectives in the game are to build their credit score, to transfer money into their savings account, and maintain their work-life study balance. This is customizable. The teacher sets what kinds of events are going to pop up. The teacher sets all the kinds of bills the students have, but the students can still make decisions around the settings the teacher made. So depending on what you set as the average rent, the student might be able to find something a little bit cheaper if they find roommates or something. Next up is our stock market game. We have the best stock market game on the market, hands down. So our stock game is used by 15,000 classes each year, extremely easy to use. We have built-in tutorials, integrated research, class rankings, exploratory reports. Teachers set all the settings that they want for their class. How much cash do students get, how many trades can they make, what can they trade, can they day trade, can they short sell, etc. This picture here is our actual trading page. Students just can enter a company name. They don't even need to know the ticker symbol. We showed them the company name, the company's logo. They have a couple different types of charts. They can do research right on the trading page. They have research built into it, so what are Wall Street analysts saying about this stock? They can get the price history going back to the IPO, financial statements going back 20 years, annually or quarterly, company news to show why the stock is going up and down, and a lot more stuff. In our stock game, we also have built-in note-taking. So every time a student tries to place a trade in their portfolio, we ask them why they're doing it. The teachers can make it so the students have to write their explanation for every trade they make. Students cannot edit their notes later. They can review them so they can, see was their original rationale valid, and the teachers can see those too, but they can't change anything later. So at the end of the day, one of the things we want the students to walk away from is this concept of buy what you know and know what you buy. So we want to take a regular statement of, I am going to the store to buy some food, to, I am going outside in my Nike shoes, Wrangler jeans, Abercrombie & Fitch t-shirt to the Bank of America ATM to get some cash, then drive my Ford car, rolling Goodyear tires and BP gas to Walmart to buy Charmin toilet paper, Crest toothpaste, Coca-Cola, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Then I'm stopping by McDonald's and Walgreens pharmacy to get my grandma's Lipitor prescription and some Revlon lipstick. There's a lot going on here. It makes students aware when they start using a stock game, where is their money going? How many companies are interacting with on a daily basis? Why do Charmin and Crest have the same ticker symbol? This applies to things like marketing classes when they talk about product diversification. It comes to personal finance classes and just understanding where their money flows. It comes down to business classes when you're talking about how these different companies are actually managing their finances, because why is their stock prices going up and down, and everything in between. In the budgeting game, why it works is we do an emphasis on cash flow. Where is the money? Where is the student's money going, and how fast? There's a lot of emphasis on students think that if they just know what their fixed expenses are, then they don't need to budget. The emphasis in the budget game is, yes, you do. All these variable, unexpected expenses are something that are going to happen every month, and you need to learn how to plan for them. We give the teacher a lot of control, so they decide what kinds of events are going to occur. So while you're talking about insurance topics in class, you can have the events popping up in the game emphasizing things like renter's insurance and health insurance. When you're talking about contracts in your class, you can have a bunch of events coming up in the game where the student is prompted with their rent contract, and they need to know if some of the stuff that they want to do is even allowed or not. Can they hang sheets from their balcony to dry, or is that against the rules? If their landlord is trying to pass off a fee on them for snow removal, can they do that in the contract, or can they just ignore the fee and then fight them on it? And there's a lot of repetition. So the students go through, on average, 12 months of the budgeting game, with each month taking about 20 minutes. And they're going to see some of the same stuff each month, but every month they do it, they're going to get better at planning for those unexpected expenses. They're going to get better at hitting their savings goals and setting up realistic targets to begin with. So it just works really well in both cases. So to actually get things set up for, if you're a teacher using our platform, first you would set the rules for your stock game. So there's over 60 different settings you can play around with. We have defaults, which is what most teachers use, which is why they're defaults, but you can play around with a lot depending on how you want to run your class. Next up, you set up your personal finance, you set up the settings for your personal budgeting game. So how much rent, what are the phone bills, what are the car insurance they're paying each month, how much are they spending on groceries, that kind of thing. There's going to be some variation when students go into the game, but you can set these for the averages for the class, which also means that you can, after a couple weeks of playing the game, give students a rent hike, and they need to find a way to adjust their budget accordingly. Step 3, you create your assignments. So what are the students going to be doing in the class? So investing stuff, personal finance, economics, career readiness, accounting, management, marketing, everything in between. For each task, basically we list what the national standards are that we're specifically aligning to, but you can also choose whether or not the students are retrying the thing, or they're just getting it for a grade, and just select all the stuff that you want the students to do. Fourth step is you'll get your students registered. There's a few different ways to do it. The simplest is we give you a link. You give this link to your students. They pick their username and password. You can also just say, I need 15 student accounts. We'll give you 15 logins, and you distribute to those to your students. If your school uses Google Classroom, the students can just sign in directly with their Google Classroom account with no other. They just need to pick a username that's going to appear in the rankings. And the fifth step, when the students log in, they see their stock game, they see their budget game, they see their assignment progress of what they're supposed to be doing, and all in one place. So we make it pretty easy for them to get around. There's a lot of information, but we spend a lot of time and effort trying to keep it to the point where it's all very easily digestible for younger students. And when you sign as a teacher, you get all kinds of reports. There's dozens of reports available. You can customize your reports. You can post messages to your students. There's some bell ringer stuff built into it, like what are the most commonly traded stocks in the class, who's moving up and down in the rankings, so good stuff to introduce to the class each week. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. We also have a ton of research tools built in, so they can, even if they're not trading, they can do all kinds of research on stocks and investing. There's over 23 different research reports they can find. We have personal finance calculators built in. So, instead of it being an article with a quiz, we give them a tool and a scenario that they need to use the tool to solve. Compound interest, saving up to be a millionaire by the time they retire, that kind of thing. This is one of our example lessons on a bond. You can see in one of these lessons we do things like a short video explaining the concept. We do glossary terms that relate to the concept. We have little drag and drop mini games to kind of cement some of that knowledge, and it ends with that pop quiz. We also have a career center built in. So our career center has over 350,000 jobs in it at any given time. We pulled these from a few different job boards across the web. We have career readiness tips, how to build a cover letter, some of the important certifications of the finance industry, put information for that in there. Students can apply for these jobs and internships directly, and we do see that happen a lot of times over the summer. The main usage, though, is when you're talking about careers in your classes. The students use the Career Center to research the kinds of jobs they want, what do they need to get those jobs, and kind of working backwards to where they are today. Now, for the hardware side of the lab, the first easiest component is LCD screens. So an LCD screen is basically a TV that you stick a little plug in the back of it into the HDMI port, and then we can start pumping financial data to that screen. So a few things that you see here, the big one in the back is showing interest rates, forex rates, and market news feed and some charts. The bigger blue one from University of Michigan, this one is talking about announcements from the school along with the news feed from CBS. The one at the bottom left is showing a customizable watch list that the class worked together to build. So there's a few different widgets that you can mix and match and put together. This is the easiest hardware component to have into a lab. If you already have a TV screen, all it would take is the little stick I mentioned, which costs about $100. And then when we're using your personal finance lab site, it would be another $360 per year to get the data for the screen. One of the biggest things that we're not showing here is you can also broadcast your class rankings to these screens, which students love seeing their name up on the boards. Next up, LED tickers. So the LED tickers are kind of the crown jewel, and they're also the most expensive. An 8-foot ticker is about $5,100. A 16-foot ticker is about almost $10,000, just as the hardware, and then it costs another $500 per year for the data that goes to these tickers. So our company does not sell these tickers directly. We work with another company that we refer schools to. I would say that the vast majority of the schools we work with that have a ticker usually got it paid for through some kind of grant or a corporate sponsorship. Most labs start out either just with software alone, or they get one LCD screen and kind of build up from there. Another major component of labs is posters. So this is the easiest thing to put up. They're free from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. So frbatlanta.org/education. You can order as many as you want. They have a bunch there. And this is the first thing that most schools do to set the mood for the lab, to kind of differentiate it from the other classrooms. So we like this quote, completely transformed learning experience. Students love it, and I'm thrilled with the increased level of student engagement. This is from one of the first schools that used Personal Finance Lab. There's actually a test we did at Johnson and Wales University. So this is a university personal finance class they used it for the first time, and that's the feedback we were getting, and that's the kind of thing we love to see. So if you want to build a lab, step 1, planning and budgeting. So identify what subjects and student clubs can use the lab. If you can get more departments to use it, you can usually get a bigger budget for what's going to actually be in the lab. Evaluate the walls, ceilings, and all that kind of stuff. If you want a ticker, you probably want a drop ceiling. In every case, you're going to want any hardware you put in visible from the hallway, but ideally not visible from not at the very front of the room, so it doesn't become a distraction. And get some quotes from vendors, which we can help you out with. Prepare any budget requests and anything, and while you're doing all that, you can take advantage of the free resources. So we have howthemarketworks.com is our free stock game. It has a sample of our curriculum. There's workbooks and things from NEFI, for the free posters from the Federal Reserve. All that stuff is a cheap and easy way you can get started right now. Step 2, as soon as you have a budget available, you can upgrade to personalfinancelab.com. This is the main high school product that we have. So it'd be $1,595 for a year, up to 100 students for basically everything. All of the curriculum, all of our stock game, bonds, mutual funds, Forex, cryptocurrencies, everything in between, and our personal budgeting game. So the personal budgeting game is not on our How the Market Works site. It's only on the Personal Finance Lab one. And you can configure any existing TVs you have, or you can stop by Best Buy and pick up a cheap LCD for a couple $100, and then put up the LCD screen, start broadcasting class rankings, glossary terms, that kind of stuff. If you want the screens, it's $360 per year, and that would cover up to 3 screens. So some schools we work with will have 1 or 2 screens in the lab space classroom. They might put another screen out in the hallway or in the lunchroom. We can broadcast things like your school's lunch menu on top of everything else. So that's really flexible. Step 3, this would be as grants come in or you get sponsorships, and you can do the full finished lab. You get a scrolling ticker. You can replace the cheaper LCD screens with commercial grade displays. Basically the difference is if you go to Best Buy and you buy a TV, you need to make sure you turn it off every night. You can kind of have to make sure that you don't leave it on too long, or else you can get screen burn. If you get a commercial grade screen, it's probably going to be 1.5 to 2 times as expensive, but you're going to be able to leave it on for 20 years at a time. And you can start upgrading your Personal Finance Lab license for multiple classes, school-wide investing challenges, and schools that run a school-wide investing challenge, we usually offer prizes for that, and get a lot more creative how you're using lab space. And when you go into your classroom, you're going to have the coolest room in the school. There's not really a replacement for that. So happy students, cool class, the best that you can do. It's really worth it. I've never talked to a teacher who started working in a lab and regretted it in any way. But basically, if you want to take the first steps, you can join our demo challenge. So go to this web address, content@personalfinancelab.com/demo. This will register you a trial student account in one of our test classes, where you can test out the stock game, you can get some of the curriculum, you can play around with the budgeting game and kind of get a feel for how it works. If you have any questions, my name is Kevin.
You can contact me, kevin@personalfinancelab.com, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you for attending, and I hope to see you on our platform soon.